The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sprawling parking lots of the AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. The air was thick with the scent of barbecue smoke and the excited chatter of thousands of country music fans making their way toward the venue. Tonight was more than just another concert. It was a homecoming for the king of country himself, George Strait. Sarah Michelle Thompson adjusted her worn cowboy hat as she walked hand in hand with her 8-year-old daughter, Emma Grace Thompson. The little girl's eyes sparkled with excitement, her blonde pigtails bouncing with each eager step. Sarah had saved for months to afford these tickets, working double shifts at the diner in their small town of Cedar Creek, 2 hours south of Dallas. "Mama, are we really gonna see George Strait?" Emma asked for the 20th time that day, her small voice barely containing her enthusiasm. Sarah smiled down at her daughter, remembering how Emma had discovered country music through her grandmother's old records. "Yes, sweetheart, we're really going to see him." Not far from them, Marcus Daniel Rodriguez was helping his elderly father, Roberto Carlos Rodriguez, navigate through the crowd. At 73, Roberto moved slowly, but with determination. This concert meant everything to him. George Strait's music had been the soundtrack to his 50-year marriage to his late wife, Maria. "Mijo, I can't believe you got us these seats," Roberto said, his weathered hands gripping his son's arm for support. "Right up front, just like your mother always wanted." Marcus, a construction foreman with calloused hands and a heart full of love for his father, nodded. "She would have loved this, Papa. I know she's here with us tonight." Inside the stadium, the energy was building to a crescendo. Jessica Ann Williams, a 25-year-old music journalist from Austin, was checking her recorder and notepad. This wasn't just another assignment for the local paper. This was personal. George Strait's music had helped her through her parents' divorce when she was a teenager, and tonight she hoped to capture something special about the man who had given voice to so many American stories. Behind the stage, in the controlled chaos of pre-show preparations, stage manager David Paul Sullivan was coordinating the final details. He'd been working concerts for 15 years, but there was something different about a George Strait show. The reverence in the air was palpable, almost spiritual. "Sound check complete," came the voice through his headset. "Mr. Strait is ready when you are." David looked out at the sea of cowboy hats and anticipated faces filling the stadium. Tonight, 80,000 people had come together for one reason: to hear the authentic voice of Texas, the man who had never forgotten where he came from. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink, the first notes of the evening began to echo through the stadium. The opening act took the stage, but everyone knew they were just warming up the crowd for the main event. In section 118, Emma Grace Thompson was practically vibrating with excitement. She had memorized every George Strait song her grandmother had taught her, from Amarillo Morning to Check Yes or No. Her small hands clutched a homemade poster that read, "Thank you for the music, Mr. George." 3 sections over, Roberto Rodriguez closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. Each note seemed to carry memories of dancing with Maria in their kitchen, of road trips across Texas with the radio turned up, of quiet moments when only a George Strait ballad could express what words couldn't. Jessica Williams was already taking notes, observing the crowd's reaction. This wasn't just entertainment, this was communion. She watched as strangers became friends over shared lyrics, as grandparents passed down songs to grandchildren, as the universal language of country music created connections that transcended age, race, and social status. The opening act finished to enthusiastic applause, and the stage lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd that was so complete, it seemed as if the entire state of Texas was holding its breath. Then the familiar silhouette appeared, and 80,000 voices erupted in a roar that could probably be heard in Oklahoma. George Strait stepped into the spotlight, his signature cowboy hat tilted just right, his presence commanding yet humble. He raised his hand in a simple wave, and somehow that small gesture contained all the warmth and authenticity that had made him a legend. "Good evening, Texas," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying that distinctive, gentle authority that had narrated the soundtrack of American life for decades. "It's good to be home." The crowd's response was thunderous, but underneath the noise there was something deeper. A collective recognition that they were in the presence of something rare and precious. This wasn't just a performer, this was a keeper of stories, a guardian of the American heart. As the first song began, Emma Grace Thompson stood on her seat, her small voice joining the massive choir of fans. Sarah watched her daughter with tears in her eyes, thinking of her own mother, who had passed just last year, and how she had always said that George Strait's voice could heal anything that was broken. Roberto Rodriguez felt his son's hand on his shoulder as the music transported him back through 50 years of memories. Marcus watched his father's face transform, years seeming to melt away as the songs connected him to his beloved Maria once again. Jessica Williams observed it all, her journalistic eye trying to capture the magic in words, but knowing that some things could only be felt, never fully explained. The concert continued, each song a masterpiece of storytelling, each note a thread in the tapestry of American life. George Strait moved through his catalogue with the ease of a master craftsman, his voice as pure and true as it had been 30 years ago. But none of them, not Emma Grace with her innocent excitement, not Roberto with his heart full of memories, not Jessica with her keen observer's eye, not David managing the technical perfection of the show. None of them could have predicted what was about to happen. None of them knew that in just a few songs, a moment would occur that would silence 80,000 people and touch the deepest places of the human heart. The stage lights shifted, casting a warm glow across George Strait's weathered but kind face. He adjusted his guitar strap and looked out at the sea of faces, each one representing a story, a life, a connection to the music that had defined his career. "You know," he said, his voice intimate despite the massive venue, "every night I'm up here, I'm reminded of why I do this. It's not about the charts or the awards. It's about you folks and the stories we share through music." The crowd listened with rapt attention, sensing that something special was building in the Texas air. The concert had been flowing like a river of pure country gold for over an hour. George Strait had taken his audience through a journey of heartbreak and healing, of small-town dreams and big-city disappointments, of love found and love lost. The stadium had become a single living entity, breathing and swaying in perfect harmony with each song. Emma Grace Thompson had been singing along to every word, her clear 8-year-old voice somehow managing to cut through the massive chorus around her. Her mother Sarah watched with a mixture of pride and amazement as her daughter seemed to know lyrics to songs that were recorded before she was even born. "How does she know all these words?" asked the woman sitting next to them, Linda Sue Patterson, a 60-year-old retired teacher from Fort Worth who had come with her sister. Sarah smiled. "My mother. She played George Strait records every day while babysitting Emma. Said it was important for a Texas girl to know her musical heritage." Linda Sue nodded knowingly. "Smart woman. These songs are like prayers set to music." On stage, George Strait was preparing for one of his most beloved ballads. The lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, and the instrumental introduction to Baby Blue began to play. This song always held special meaning for him, though the audience didn't know the personal pain it carried. The crowd recognized the opening notes immediately, and a reverent quiet settled over the stadium. This was one of those songs that required respectful attention, one of those moments when 80,000 people could feel like an intimate gathering. Roberto Rodriguez felt his son's hand tighten on his shoulder. This had been Maria's favorite song. Marcus remembered his parents dancing to it in their living room on countless Sunday afternoons, his mother humming along in her sweet, soft voice. Jessica Williams readied her pen, sensing that this moment might be significant for her article. There was something in the air, an electricity that seemed different from the standard concert atmosphere. George Strait began to sing, his voice carrying across the stadium with the clarity and emotion that had made him legendary. Each word was delivered with the precision of a master storyteller, each note perfect in its simplicity. But then, just as the song reached its most poignant moment, something unexpected happened. A small voice, pure and innocent, cut through the reverent silence of 80,000 people. It came from section 118, clear as a bell and unmistakable in its sincerity. Jennifer. The name rang out across the stadium with such clarity and unexpected volume that it seemed to freeze time itself. Emma Grace Thompson, caught up in the emotion of the moment and remembering something her grandmother had told her about George Strait's daughter who had gone to heaven, had simply shouted the name with all the innocent love in her 8-year-old heart. The effect was immediate and profound. George Strait stopped singing mid-verse. His guitar fell silent. The entire band, trained professionals who had played through every conceivable interruption, simply stopped. The massive screen behind the stage showed his face in close-up, his eyes closing for just a moment, his hand gripping the microphone stand a little tighter. In the audience, the silence was so complete it was almost painful. 80,000 people seemed to collectively hold their breath. Those who knew the story of George Strait's personal tragedy felt their hearts clench with recognition and empathy. Those who didn't know sensed the weight of the moment without understanding its source. Sarah Thompson felt her heart stop as she realized what her daughter had done. Emma Grace looked up at her mother with wide, confused eyes, suddenly aware that something significant had happened, but not quite understanding what. "Mama?" Emma whispered, her small voice barely audible in the massive silence. "Did I do something wrong?" 3 sections away, Roberto Rodriguez felt tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. He understood the weight of loss, the pain of missing someone who should still be there. His son Marcus wrapped his arm around his father's shoulders, both men feeling the collective grief that seemed to emanate from the stage. Jessica Williams had stopped writing entirely, her pen suspended over her notepad as she witnessed something that transcended journalism. This wasn't a story anymore. This was a shared human moment of such raw authenticity that it felt sacred. David Sullivan, watching from the side of the stage, felt his own eyes well up with tears. In 15 years of managing concerts, he had never seen George Strait show emotion like this. The man was known for his professionalism, his ability to perform through anything, but this innocent shout from a child had reached him in a place that music rarely touched. The silence stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. In the massive stadium, you could have heard a pin drop. The collective breathing of 80,000 people seemed to create its own rhythm, a shared heartbeat of empathy and understanding. Linda Sue Patterson reached over and gently took Sarah's hand, understanding without words what had happened. Around them, other audience members were wiping away tears, their faces reflecting a mixture of sadness and profound respect for the moment they were witnessing. George Strait opened his eyes and looked out at the audience. For a moment, he seemed to be looking directly at section 118, as if he could somehow see the innocent child who had spoken his daughter's name with such pure love. His weathered face showed the kind of vulnerability that only comes from genuine emotion. The big screen captured every nuance of his expression, the slight tremor in his jaw, the way his eyes seemed to glisten with unshed tears, the visible struggle between his professional composure and his paternal grief. This was a man who had learned to carry his pain with dignity, but who had just been reminded of it in the most unexpected and touching way possible. Tommy Michael Chen, a 19-year-old college student from Houston who had come with his girlfriend, felt his own eyes filling with tears despite not fully understanding what was happening. The emotion in the stadium was so thick, it was almost tangible. "What's going on?" whispered his girlfriend, Amanda Rose Foster, a sophomore studying music therapy. "I think," Tommy whispered back, his voice choked with unexpected emotion, "I think that little girl just said something really important." The band members stood frozen on stage, their instruments silent, their eyes on their leader. They had played with George Strait for years, through celebrations and sorrows, but they had never seen him affected quite like this. Emma Grace Thompson, still not fully understanding what she had done, felt her mother's arm wrap around her protectively. The little girl could sense the weight of the moment, could feel the eyes of thousands of people, could understand that her simple shout had created something bigger than herself. "I just wanted to tell him about Jennifer," she whispered to her mother, her young voice breaking slightly. "Grandma said she was in heaven and that he missed her. I thought maybe if I said her name, he would know that we remember her too." Sarah felt her heart break and swell simultaneously. Her daughter's innocent wisdom, her pure intention to offer comfort, had created this moment of raw, shared humanity. The silence continued, stretching across the stadium like a prayer. This wasn't awkward or uncomfortable. It was reverent, respectful, profound. 80,000 people were sharing in a moment of grief and love that transcended entertainment and became something approaching spiritual. George Strait finally lifted his head, his eyes scanning the crowd with a mixture of pain and gratitude. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but in the perfect acoustics of the stadium and the absolute silence of the crowd, every word carried clearly to every corner. The silence that followed Emma Grace's innocent shout seemed to expand and deepen, becoming something alive and breathing. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the presence of something much more powerful. 80,000 hearts beating in unison, 80,000 souls connected by the invisible thread of shared human experience. George Strait stood on that massive stage, surrounded by equipment worth millions of dollars, backed by a world-class band, supported by a production crew of hundreds, but in that moment he was simply a father missing his daughter. The veneer of stardom had been stripped away by the pure innocence of a child's voice, leaving only the raw truth of love and loss. Dara, Margaret Ellen Foster, a grief counselor from Dallas, who had come to the concert with her husband, recognized the moment for what it was. A collective processing of loss that was happening on a scale she had never witnessed before. She watched faces in the crowd around her, seeing recognition, empathy, and healing happening in real time. "Honey," she whispered to her husband, James Robert Foster, a retired police officer who had seen his share of life's harder moments, "are you seeing this?" James nodded, his own eyes moist. In 30 years of law enforcement, he had learned to read emotional situations, and what he was witnessing transcended anything he had ever experienced. "This is something special, Maggie. This is really something special." Near them, Father Miguel Antonio Santos, a Catholic priest from San Antonio who had been given the tickets by his parishioners, found himself offering a silent prayer. Not just for George Strait and the daughter he had lost, but for every parent in that stadium who understood that particular kind of pain, and for the beautiful innocence of the child who had spoken with such pure intention. In section 224, nurse practitioner Carol Jane Washington was thinking of her own patients, the parents she had comforted through loss, the families she had seen struggle with grief. She had always believed in the healing power of music, but she had never seen it demonstrated quite like this. Her husband, military veteran Robert Lee Washington, squeezed her hand, both of them understanding that they were witnessing something that would stay with them forever. The band members on stage remained motionless, their instruments silent, Lead guitarist Kevin Paul Morrison, who had played with George Strait for over a decade, had never seen his boss show this kind of vulnerability. Drummer Matthew James Sullivan kept his sticks lowered, knowing instinctively that this moment belonged to silence, not rhythm. Emma Grace Thompson looked up at her mother with those wide, innocent eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom and confusion of childhood. "Mama, why is everyone so quiet? Did I make everyone sad?" Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level, her own eyes filling with tears. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes love and sadness are the same thing? How do you tell a child that her innocent gesture had touched something sacred? "No, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You didn't make anyone sad. You reminded everyone how much love there is in the world." Around them, other audience members were having their own profound moments. Helen Marie Kowalski, an 82-year-old widow from Austin, thought of her own children and grandchildren, feeling grateful for every day she had been given with them. She reached into her purse for a tissue, not embarrassed by her tears, but rather grateful for the reminder of how precious life was. Her granddaughter, 26-year-old nurse Emily Grace Kowalski, who had brought her grandmother to the concert as a birthday gift, felt a deep appreciation for the woman beside her. Watching her grandmother's emotional response to this moment of shared humanity reminded Emily why she had chosen a profession dedicated to caring for others. George Strait finally raised his head, and when he looked out at the audience, his expression had changed. The initial shock and pain had transformed into something deeper, a recognition of the love that surrounded him, not just from his fans, but from the universe itself, delivered through the innocent voice of a child. He took a step closer to the edge of the stage, his hands still gripping the microphone. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but carried clearly through the perfect acoustics and absolute attention of the crowd. "You know," he began, his voice thick with emotion but steady. 13 years ago, I lost my daughter Jennifer in a car accident. She was just 13 years old. The silence deepened, if such a thing were possible. Those who had known the story felt their hearts break anew for him. Those hearing it for the first time felt the weight of his loss settle over them like a heavy blanket. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about her," he continued, his eyes scanning the crowd as if looking for the child who had spoken her name. "Not a song that I don't wonder what she would have thought of it. Not a moment on this stage that I don't wish she could be here to see it." In section 118, Emma Grace had stopped fidgeting entirely. Even at 8 years old, she could sense the importance of this moment, could understand that the man on stage was sharing something precious and painful. "But tonight," George Strait continued, his voice growing stronger, "a little angel in this audience reminded me of something I sometimes forget in my grief. She reminded me that Jennifer isn't really gone. She's here in the love of people who never even met her but remember her name. She's here in the kindness of a child who thought to speak her name with love." Roberto Rodriguez felt his son's arm tighten around him. This was exactly what he needed to hear about his own loss, about his Maria. Love doesn't end with death. It transforms, it multiplies, it becomes part of the fabric of the world through the people who remember. "I don't know which little one called out her name," George Strait said, his eyes still searching the crowd, "but I want that child and her family to know something. You just gave me the greatest gift anyone could give a father. You reminded me that my daughter's life mattered, that she's remembered that love really is stronger than loss." The silence was broken by a few sniffles, by the soft sound of people reaching for tissues, by the gentle rustle of 80,000 people deeply moved. But no one spoke, no one cheered, no one clapped. This moment required something deeper than applause. Jessica Williams had stopped taking notes entirely. Her journalistic training told her to document everything, but her human heart told her that some moments were too sacred for documentation. This was life happening at its most authentic level, and she felt privileged just to witness it. David Sullivan, watching from the side of the stage, felt a profound shift in the energy of the evening. This was no longer just a concert. It had become something approaching a religious experience, a mass healing ceremony conducted through the power of music and shared humanity. So many of you, George Strait continued, have lost someone you love, parents, children, spouses, friends, and sometimes the grief feels so heavy that we think we might drown in it. But tonight, a child reminded me that love is the thing that keeps us afloat. Love is the thing that makes the pain bearable. Love is the thing that never, ever dies. Teacher Rebecca Ann Martinez from El Paso thought of the students she had lost over the years, not to death but to poverty, to violence, to systems that failed them. She thought of how she carried their faces with her every day, how she taught partly for them, how love really did transcend the boundaries we thought were permanent. Her husband, firefighter Carlos Eduardo Martinez, thought of the lives he hadn't been able to save, the families he had comforted in their worst moments, the way first responders carry the weight of other people's tragedies. He understood what George Strait was talking about, the way love becomes both burden and blessing when someone is gone. "I'm going to finish this song," George Strait said, his voice now steady and strong. "And I'm going to dedicate it to every person we've lost, and to every person who keeps their memory alive with love." He raised his guitar, and the band, understanding the cue, prepared to rejoin him. But before they began, he spoke one more time. "And to that little angel who spoke my daughter's name tonight, thank you. Thank you for reminding this old cowboy that some things are bigger than music, bigger than fame, bigger than anything except love itself." As George Strait raised his guitar to continue Baby Blue, the atmosphere in the stadium had completely transformed. What had begun as a concert had evolved into something approaching a sacred service, a collective moment of healing that no one in attendance would ever forget. The first gentle notes of the song resumed, but now they carried additional weight. Each chord seemed to vibrate not just through the air, but through the hearts of everyone present. George Strait's voice, when he began to sing again, held a new depth of emotion. Not just the polished perfection of a country music legend, but the raw truth of a father who had found unexpected comfort in the innocence of a child. Emma Grace Thompson sat perfectly still, her small hand in her mother's, finally understanding that she had done something important. She didn't fully comprehend the depth of what had happened, but she could feel the change in the air around her, could sense that the sadness in the stadium had somehow become mixed with something beautiful. "Mama," she whispered, "is Mr. George feeling better now?" Sarah looked down at her daughter, this 8-year-old who had somehow managed to reach across the vast space of a stadium and touch the heart of a grieving father. "I think so, baby. I think you helped remind him that his little girl is still loved." The song continued, and now the entire audience seemed to be participating in a different way. They weren't just listening to a performer, they were sharing in a moment of collective memory, of communal grief and healing. Many were thinking of their own lost loved ones, their own moments of pain that had been softened by unexpected kindness. Dr. Patricia McKinnon, a pediatric oncologist from Houston who had come to the concert to decompress from the emotional intensity of her work, found herself thinking of all the children she had treated over the years. Some had survived, some hadn't, but all had left their mark on her heart. She understood what George Strait was feeling, the way love persists beyond loss, the way memory becomes a form of presence. Beside her, her wife, social worker Jennifer Marie McKinnon, was thinking of the families she counseled through crisis. She had seen how grief could either destroy people or transform them into deeper, more compassionate versions of themselves. Tonight, she was witnessing the latter happen on a massive scale. The song reached its conclusion, and as the final notes faded into the Texas night, something beautiful happened. Instead of the usual roar of applause, the audience began to clap slowly, rhythmically, respectfully. It wasn't celebration. It was acknowledgement, gratitude, a form of prayer expressed through the universal language of appreciation. George Strait stood quietly, receiving this unusual ovation, his eyes still glistening with emotion. He nodded slowly, understanding that this applause was different from any he had received in his long career. This was 80,000 people saying thank you for sharing his humanity, for allowing them to be part of something larger than entertainment. When the applause finally faded, he spoke again. "You know, I've been performing for almost 40 years, and I thought I understood what music was for. I thought it was about telling stories, about entertaining folks, about preserving traditions." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces. "But tonight, a little girl taught me something new. Music isn't just about telling stories, it's about connecting hearts. It's about reminding us that we're not alone in our joys or our sorrows." Roberto Rodriguez felt his son's hand squeeze his shoulder. This was exactly what he had hoped to find tonight. Not just entertainment, but connection. Not just distraction from grief, but integration of it into something meaningful. Maria had always said that the best country songs were prayers set to music, and tonight he understood what she meant. "The rest of this show," George Strait continued, "is for everyone who has ever loved someone, everyone who has ever lost someone, and everyone who believes that love is stronger than anything this world can throw at us." He launched into Amarillo Morning, but now the familiar song carried new meaning. It wasn't just about the beauty of a Texas sunrise, it was about hope, about the way light always returns after darkness, about the promise that tomorrow brings new possibilities for connection and healing. Emma Grace began singing along again, her clear young voice joining the massive chorus. Around her, other audience members were singing too, but with a different energy than before. They were singing not just to enjoy themselves, but to participate in something larger, to add their voices to a collective expression of hope and resilience. Pastor William David Jackson from Beaumont, who had initially felt guilty about enjoying secular music, now understood that what he was witnessing was deeply spiritual. This was community in its purest form. This was the kind of gathering that his theology taught him to celebrate. People coming together in love, supporting each other through pain, finding hope in shared experience. His teenage daughter, Sophia Grace Jackson, who had been embarrassed to be at a country concert with her father, now felt proud to be part of this moment. She was learning that authentic emotion transcends musical genres, that real art speaks to universal human experiences regardless of style or category. As the concert continued, each song seemed to build on the foundation that had been laid by Emma Grace's innocent shout and George Strait's vulnerable response. The Chair became a meditation on missed opportunities and second chances. All My Exes Live in Texas transformed from a humorous song into a celebration of the complexity of human relationships. I Cross My Heart became a promise not just between lovers, but between all people who choose to remain open to love, despite the risk of loss. Music journalist Jessica Williams found herself experiencing the concert as both professional observer and emotional participant. She was witnessing the power of authentic human connection to transform entertainment into something approaching art therapy on a massive scale. This wasn't just a story about a concert, this was a story about the capacity of music to heal, to connect, to transform. During Give It Away, a song about the end of a marriage, she watched as couples in the audience held each other a little tighter, as people alone felt a little less isolated, as the universal experience of heartbreak became a source of connection rather than separation. Stage manager David Sullivan was coordinating the technical aspects of the show with his usual precision, but he was also aware that he was managing something unprecedented. The crew members, from lighting technicians to security personnel, All seemed to be working with an extra level of care and attention, as if they understood that they were facilitating something sacred. Sound engineer Rachel Ann Martinez noticed that the audience's singing had changed throughout the evening. After that moment of silence, their voices had become more unified, more harmonious, as if the collective emotional experience had somehow tuned them to the same frequency. "It's like they're all singing together for the first time," she whispered to her assistant, Marcus Anthony Davis, a recent audio engineering graduate who was working his first major concert. Marcus nodded, understanding despite his inexperience that he was witnessing something unique. It's like they all became one voice when that little girl called out. Like they remembered they were all in this together. The concert moved through George Strait's catalogue, each song now carrying the weight and beauty of the earlier moment. Check Yes or No had the audience laughing and singing along, but with an awareness of how precious and fleeting young love can be. Heartland became an anthem not just for rural America, but for anyone who had ever felt connected to a place, a community, a sense of belonging. As the evening progressed toward its conclusion, Emma Grace had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, exhausted by the excitement and emotion of the night. Sarah looked down at her daughter, this little girl, who had somehow managed to touch the heart of a legend, and in doing so, had touched the hearts of 80,000 strangers. Around them, the concert continued, but with an energy that felt both celebratory and sacred. People were singing, laughing, crying, hugging strangers, sharing stories with their neighbors. Emma Grace's innocent shout had somehow broken down the walls that usually separate people at large events, creating a sense of community that felt almost miraculous. Roberto Rodriguez was thinking about what he would tell his friends back home, how he would describe this night to his late wife's sister, how he would carry this feeling of connection and hope back into his daily life. His son, Marcus, was already planning to buy his father every George Strait album he didn't already own, understanding that tonight's experience had created new meaning in familiar songs. The concert was building toward its finale, but everyone in the stadium understood that the real climax had already occurred. In that moment of silence, in that vulnerable sharing, in that innocent child's expression of love and memory, something had shifted. The evening had become more than entertainment. It had become a reminder of what human beings can be for each other when they allow their hearts to remain open despite the inevitability of loss. As George Strait prepared for his final song of the evening, the energy in the stadium felt different from any concert ending in memory. Usually, this moment would be filled with the bittersweet anticipation of conclusion, the knowledge that a magical evening was about to end. Tonight, however, felt more like a beginning, as if everyone present had been part of something that would continue to resonate long after the last note faded. The stage lights dimmed to a warm, golden glow that seemed to embrace the entire stadium. George Strait stepped to the center of the stage, his silhouette iconic against the backdrop of lights, his presence somehow both larger than life and intimately human. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the perfect acoustics and the reverent attention of 80,000 people. "I've been thinking about what to say to end this evening, and I keep coming back to something my daddy told me when I was young. He said that the measure of a good day isn't what you get from it, but what you give to it." Emma Grace Thompson had awakened just as the final song was beginning. Still drowsy from her nap against her mother's shoulder, she looked up at the stage with sleepy eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of childhood. She didn't yet understand the full impact of what she had done, but she could feel that something important had happened. "Did I help, Mama?" she whispered. Sarah looked down at her daughter, this 8-year-old who had somehow managed to create a moment of healing for thousands of people. "Yes, baby. You helped more than you'll ever know. Tonight," George Strait continued, Each one of you gave something precious to this old cowboy. You gave me your attention, your energy, your voices singing along. But one little angel gave me something even more precious, a reminder that love never really ends, it just changes form. Roberto Rodriguez felt his son's arm around his shoulders and thought about how perfectly those words described his feelings about Maria. She wasn't gone. She was transformed, present in every song they had shared, every memory they had created, every moment like this when beauty and love seemed to fill the world. "This last song," George Strait said, "goes out to everyone who has ever loved deeply enough to risk heartbreak, everyone who has ever chosen hope over despair, and everyone who believes that we're all in this beautiful, difficult journey together." The opening notes of "I Cross My Heart" began to play, and something magical happened. Without any prompting, without any encouragement from the stage, the entire audience began to sing along, not just the chorus, but every word, every note, creating a choir of 80,000 voices that seemed to lift the very roof of the stadium. Dr. Margaret Foster, the grief counselor, found herself crying openly as she listened to this massive expression of unity and hope. In 30 years of helping people process loss, she had never witnessed healing happen on this scale, this publicly, this beautifully. Her husband, James, the retired police officer, was thinking about all the difficult situations he had responded to over the years, all the times he had seen humanity at its worst. Tonight was a powerful reminder that people are capable of extraordinary goodness, extraordinary connection, extraordinary grace. The song continued, and the singing grew stronger. Jessica Williams looked around in amazement as she saw strangers harmonizing, as she watched elderly couples singing to each other, as she observed teenagers putting away their phones to participate fully in this moment of collective joy. Father Miguel Santos found himself offering a prayer of gratitude, not just for the healing he had witnessed, but for the reminder that the sacred could be found anywhere people gathered in love and mutual support. This stadium had become a sanctuary. This concert had become a form of worship. This audience had become a congregation united by something larger than themselves. In the technical booth, David Sullivan was managing the final moments of the show with tears streaming down his face. In 15 years of concert production, he had orchestrated thousands of performances, but he had never been part of anything like this. The usual post-show protocol seemed insufficient for what had occurred tonight. On stage, George Strait was singing his heart out, but he was also listening to the audience, marveling at the power of their collective voice. He had performed this song hundreds of times, but tonight it felt like he was hearing it for the first time, not as a performance, but as a prayer, a promise, a declaration of faith in the enduring power of love. As the song built toward its climax, something unprecedented happened. George Strait stopped singing and simply listened as 80,000 voices carried the melody without him. He stood at the center of the stage, his hands spread wide as if to embrace the entire stadium, his face reflecting wonder and gratitude and profound humility. The audience continued singing, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to come from some deeper place than individual skill or training. This was the sound of human hearts speaking in unison, the sound of community at its most pure and powerful. Emma Grace Thompson, now fully awake, stood on her seat and sang along with all the innocent joy her 8-year-old voice could muster. Around her, other children had been lifted onto parents' shoulders, their young voices adding a descant of hope to the massive choir. Tommy Chen and Amanda Foster, the college couple from Houston, found themselves holding hands and singing directly to each other, using George Strait's words to express feelings they were only beginning to understand about love and commitment, and the courage it takes to open your heart to another person. Carol and Robert Washington, the nurse and veteran couple, sang with the knowledge that came from years of marriage, years of facing life's challenges together, years of understanding that love is not just a feeling, but a choice made new each day. As the song reached its final verse, George Strait stepped back to his microphone and joined his voice with the audience. Singer and audience had become one instrument, one heart, one expression of everything that makes life worth living, despite its inevitable sorrows. The last note hung in the air for what seemed like an eternity, sustained by 80,000 voices reluctant to let the moment end. When the music finally faded to silence, no one moved. The stadium sat in perfect quiet for a long moment, as if everyone understood that applause would somehow diminish what had just occurred. Then, slowly, George Strait began to clap. Not the enthusiastic applause of performance, but the slow, respectful clapping of recognition and gratitude. The audience joined him, creating a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat, like the pulse of life itself. "Thank you," George Strait said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for reminding me why I do this. Thank you for showing me that music is bigger than any one person. Thank you for proving that love really is the strongest force in the universe." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces that had become so much more than an audience. "And to that little angel who called out my daughter's name, wherever you are out there, thank you for the greatest gift anyone could give a father. You reminded me that Jennifer's love lives on in the kindness of strangers, in the innocence of children, in moments like this, when we all remember that we're connected by something deeper than just being in the same place at the same time." The applause continued, but it was different from the usual concert ending. This was applause that acknowledged not just a performance, but a shared experience of transformation. People were clapping for George Strait, yes, but they were also clapping for each other, for the little girl who had spoken with such innocent love, for the healing they had all participated in. As the house lights came up slowly, no one seemed eager to leave. Usually concerts ended with a rush toward the exits, but tonight people lingered, talking to strangers, sharing what they had experienced, reluctant to break the spell of connection that had been cast. Sarah Thompson gathered her sleeping daughter in her arms, Emma Grace having fallen back asleep during the final ovation. As they made their way slowly through the crowd, strangers kept approaching them. "Is this the little girl?" asked Helen Kowalski, the elderly widow from Austin. Sarah nodded, still somewhat overwhelmed by what had occurred. "She has a beautiful heart," Helen said, reaching out to gently touch Emma's hand. She reminded all of us what love looks like. Linda Patterson, the retired teacher who had been sitting next to them, walked with Sarah toward the exit. "That little girl changed something tonight," she said. "I've been to hundreds of concerts, but I've never seen anything like this. She turned entertainment into healing." As they reached the concourse, David Sullivan, the stage manager, approached them. He had been asking security to help him find the family with the little girl who had called out Jennifer's name. "Excuse me," he said gently to Sarah. "Are you the mother of the little girl who called out during Baby Blue?" Sarah nodded, suddenly nervous that Emma might have gotten them in trouble. David smiled warmly. "Mr. Strait asked me to find you. He wanted me to give you this." He handed Sarah an envelope with "To the Little Angel" written on it in George Strait's handwriting. Inside was a simple note. "Thank you for reminding me that love never dies. It just finds new voices. Your daughter gave me a gift tonight that I'll treasure forever. Please tell her that Jennifer would have loved her too. George Strait." Also in the envelope was a photo of George Strait with his daughter Jennifer, signed "For Emma Grace, with love and gratitude." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she read the note. How did he know her name? David smiled. He asked around until he found out. He said it was important to him to know the name of the little girl who remembered his daughter with such love. As they finally made their way to the parking lot, Sarah looked back at the stadium, now glowing against the Texas night sky. She thought about how they had come here for entertainment and instead had been part of something that felt almost sacred. Roberto Rodriguez and his son Marcus were walking slowly toward their car, both men still processing what they had experienced. "Mijo," Roberto said, "your mother would have loved tonight. She would have said that little girl was an angel sent to remind us that love doesn't end with death." Marcus nodded, thinking about how he would carry this experience forward, how it would change the way he thought about grief and memory and the power of human connection. "We'll come back next year, Papa. We'll make it a tradition." "Yes," Roberto agreed. "We'll come back, and we'll remember tonight as the night we learned that music can heal anything if you let it." Jessica Williams was already composing her article in her head as she walked to her car, but she was struggling with how to capture what had occurred. How do you describe a moment when 80,000 people became one heart? How do you explain the power of innocent love to heal adult pain? How do you convey the way music can transform strangers into family? She decided that she wouldn't try to explain it fully. Instead, she would simply tell the story and let readers feel what she had felt. Some experiences are too big for analysis. They can only be shared and treasured and remembered. Dr. Patricia McKinnon, the pediatric oncologist, was thinking about how she would tell her patients' families about tonight. She would tell them that love persists beyond loss, that memory is a form of presence, that even in their darkest moments they were connected to a vast network of human compassion. Father Miguel Santos was planning his next sermon, inspired by what he had witnessed. He would talk about how the sacred appears in unexpected places, how children often understand spiritual truths better than adults, how community can form instantly when people allow their hearts to be open. As the parking lot slowly emptied and people began their journeys home across Texas and beyond, they carried with them something precious. Emma Grace Thompson's innocent shout had created ripples that would spread far beyond that stadium, far beyond that night. Teachers would tell their students about the power of kind words. Parents would hug their children a little tighter. Couples would remember why they fell in love. Friends would reach out to people they hadn't spoken to in years. The healing that had begun in that moment of silence would continue in countless small acts of love and connection. Emma Grace slept peacefully in her car seat as Sarah drove through the Texas night, clutching George Strait's note and photo. She would frame them for Emma's room, and someday, when her daughter was old enough to fully understand, she would tell her about the night she helped heal a father's heart and reminded 80,000 people that love is stronger than loss. The stadium stood empty now, but somehow it felt different than it had that morning. The air itself seemed changed, charged with the memory of what had occurred. Cleaning crews would find tissues scattered throughout the seats, evidence of the tears that had been shed. Not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition, of healing, of gratitude for the unexpected grace that can appear in the most ordinary moments. George Strait was in his tour bus, heading to the next city, but he carried with him the memory of a little girl's voice calling his daughter's name with such pure love. He thought about how grief had been transformed, if only for one evening, from a weight he carried alone into a burden shared by thousands of caring hearts. He picked up his phone and called his wife, Norma, who had stayed home in Texas. "How was the show?" she asked. "Different," he said, his voice still thick with emotion. "A little girl in the audience called out Jennifer's name tonight. And something beautiful happened, something I'll never forget." As tour buses and cars carried people away from Arlington into the Texas night, they took with them the knowledge that they had been part of something larger than entertainment. They had participated in a moment of collective healing, of shared humanity, of the kind of grace that appears when hearts are open to love despite the risk of loss. The story would be told and retold, passed down through families, shared among friends, carried forward through the years as a reminder of what human beings can be for each other in their finest moments. Emma Grace Thompson would grow up hearing about the night she helped heal a country music legend, but more importantly, she would grow up knowing that sometimes the simplest acts of love can have the most profound consequences. In the years to come, whenever George Strait performed Baby Blue, he would remember this night. Whenever he felt the weight of his loss becoming too heavy to bear, he would remember the innocent voice of a child, reminding him that his daughter's memory lived on in the love of strangers. Whenever he questioned whether his music still mattered, he would remember the power of 80,000 voices singing together as one. And Emma Grace would carry forward the lesson she had learned without knowing she was learning it, that love expressed with pure intention has the power to heal, to connect, to transform ordinary moments into sacred ones. She would grow up understanding that sometimes the most important things we do are the ones we do without thinking, motivated only by love and the desire to ease someone else's pain. The night sky over Texas stretched endlessly above them all, stars bearing witness to the truth that had been demonstrated in a stadium in Arlington. That love never really dies. It just finds new voices, new expressions, new ways to remind us that we are all connected by the invisible threads of human compassion. The silence that had followed Emma Grace's innocent shout would echo in the hearts of everyone who had been present for years to come. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful moments are found not in noise, but in the spaces between words, where hearts speak directly to hearts and love proves itself stronger than loss. The concert was over, but its real impact was just beginning. In the days and weeks and years to come, the story would spread, touching lives far beyond those who had been present. It would become a reminder that healing often comes from the most unexpected sources, that children sometimes understand what adults have forgotten, and that music has the power to transform entertainment into something approaching the sacred. Tonight, 80,000 people had been reminded that they were not alone in their joys or their sorrows, that love is indeed the strongest force in the universe, and that sometimes the most profound gifts come wrapped in the innocent words of a child who simply wanted to make sure that someone special was remembered with love. The stadium lights dimmed one final time, but the light that had been kindled in the hearts of everyone present would continue to shine, carried forward into countless tomorrows as a testament to the enduring power of love, memory, and human connection.